Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about Pakistan's political and economic challenges, considering, of course, we've seen the recent imposition of super tax and the politics on it. We've also had the PTI say that all of these taxes, the politics being played overall on economy at this time, the rebuffal of any and all attempts of charter of economy. Again, the government's efforts to stabilize economy. We've seen, help from China now also has arrived, or in the aftermath of all that's happening. What kind of a direction is the economy likely to take? We've also seen the dollar come down in the last 2 days, but overall, will this trend continue? All of those things today on Perspective. I have with me Shakil Rame, who's a senior economist. Thank you so much for joining us today. We also have with us Dr. Idris Khwaja, who's Chief of Research, Pakistan Institute of Developmental Economics. Thank you for being with us. And we also have with us Dr. Niaz Murtaza, who is a senior analyst. Thank you for joining us today. Shakil Sahab, like we were earlier saying, in terms of the politics that is being played at, on, over and on economics, that's not new. Unfortunately, we've had attempts by other political parties trying to get for there to be a charter of economy, and that were also rebuffed earlier on. That trend, unfortunately, seems to be continuing. In terms of what's happening at this time, as far as economy is concerned, in terms of a lot of tax, trying to get different businesses, different tier of businesses into the tax net, that is something the government seems to be working on. What kind of an effect will this have, if any, in your opinion? Do you think they'll be successful? How do you look at these measures overall?
Thank you. I think the fundamental thing which Pakistan have to understand, our political class have to understand is, so no country can be run on the only tax revenue. We need to strike a balance between non-tax and the tax revenue. If we look at a successful example of the world, and if we look at the most recent example from China, so look at the non-tax revenue from the state-owned enterprises, which contributed 32% last year in the other GDP. So we fundamentally have to change our economy, first of all. Second thing, we have to understand the political economy of the capitalist system. So when it was designed, so political economy tells us, so there would be winners and there would be losers, and the winners will compensate the losers. But unfortunately, with the passage of the time, so the winner won, the loser will compensate them. So if we look at the winners, like the businessman, business community, they are earning a lot of money, they are earning a lot of profit. But whenever come in the taxes, they say, look, we will not be ready to pay more taxes. You have to increase the taxes on the salaried class. If you are not giving us a concessions or exemptions, we are moving out our business from that country. You can take the example from USA. So when the Biden came into the power, became the president, so Biden administration, they are working on a proposal where they want to convince the whole world. So we need to have a compromise on the corporate tax. So no country can be blackmailed at the hand of the business community, so that they can say, oh look, the corporate tax is lower in that country, so we are shifting there. So in this context, we have to see. So the whole government will be successful because the business community.
You're saying that the reaction from the business community over the imposition of this 10% super tax can be, by them saying that they're going to move their businesses out?
So definitely, if you look at the business community, they will say, oh, we are already paying. Unfortunately, in Pakistan, there is no second opinion. If you look at the contribution of large scale manufacturing in the Pakistan, in our GDP, and in our taxes. I was looking at the data from the 2020, so the contribution of large production sector was 19% in our GDP, but in the tax it was 70%. And our largest sector of our economy is services sector, which was around 60%, and it was contributing only 29%. And from agriculture, at that time, which at that time was the 19% of the GDP, it was contributing only 1%. One thing, and
the question of having concentration of different governments on agriculture, and how much of that we've been able to develop with successive governments, that's also another that's another topic, and I want to come to that. Let me first go to Dr. Idris Khwaja. Ji, Idris, do you agree? Do you think that there is actually, I mean, the tax, what has been said is 10%, and as I understand it, this is, you know, sugar, cement, oil, among other industries. Correct me if I'm wrong. Do you think it's going to make a huge difference to the businesses?
This would not make a huge difference because there is a possibility that the businesses would be able to pass on this tax. Though it is a direct tax, but still there is a possibility that businesses would be able to pass on this
You're
tax.
saying that it's actually going to land up in the consumers'
With the
hands.
consumers.
So it doesn't really matter then?
It matters because it would cause inflation.
Okay.
It would add up to prices.
Okay.
At least a part of it would add up to prices. Basically, what our problem is that our tax machinery is not too efficient to collect taxes. The theory says that most of the tax revenue should come from direct taxes, but in our case, most of the revenue is coming from indirect taxes, and a large part, at least perhaps 65% something of revenue is coming from withholding taxes, which are essentially indirect taxes.
Okay.
The tax machinery is, when you charge your phone, you are basically paying withholding tax. The idea is that you can claim it back, but nobody claims it back in actual practice. So that revenue goes to the government.
How do you claim it back?
While filing your tax
I'm interested in knowing how you
while
claim
filing
it
your tax return
Okay.
for the entire year, you can claim it back. But
nobody,
since the amount is so small, nobody claims it back, and the process is so complex that it is not easy to claim it back. So a lot of significant part of the revenue is coming from withholding taxes. This shows the inability of the tax machinery to collect taxes. Now, this could be due to capacity, this could be due to corruption or whatever. So people say that corruption is not a big issue,
So
but
then we
in
talk
actual
about, okay, so when we talk about tax reform, that is what we mean, that we need tax reform to be able to, you know, actually get hold of taxes easily, to be able to collect taxes easily, and also to make it easier for people. Like you are saying, these measures are onerous, and, you know, the amount is so little that in a lot of cases none of us, you know, actually go through the hassle of it. Let me come back to you, Ji. Dr. Niaz, in terms of, I hope you've been listening, you know, you've been following the discussion. Do you agree? You think that, how do you look at this overall in terms of how do you look at the measure of this imposition of super tax primarily? Do you think that it's going to lead to some benefit, or do you think, like Idris Saab is saying, he's saying it's actually going to land up in the consumers' laps and probably going to contribute to more inflation? How do you look at it?
Well, it's possible with any tax for companies to, pass it on to the consumer. It's easier to do that with indirect taxes like sales tax and so on. With direct taxes, this is a direct tax, it's an income tax. It's a bit more convoluted, but businesses can still do that. They can foresee that their tax returns will go up, so they can jack up prices. But then that's an argument against any tax. It's not just against this particular tax. So I think we need to look at the overall picture that these sectors have made super profits over the last 2 years since there was this recovery from COVID-19. There was easy money available, low interest rates, and they've been able to make a lot of profits. This is a one-off thing. Where I would, find some fault is that, it's come piecemeal instead of all this being included in the initial finance bill that was presented on the first day. What happened was that, the government presented the bill, it wasn't good enough for the IMF, and then the government went hunting for other taxes. So it's come out a bit piecemeal, and there hasn't been a good communication with the sectors. I think that could have been improved. But in terms of the imposition itself, I think it's fine. But then, I think there should also be other sectors that are still under tax. For example, agriculture, huge, like Mr. Shakil was mentioning, only 2% of your total taxes, whereas it's close to 20% of your GDP. Similarly, retail, transport, real estate. So, in terms of, equity across different sectors, there is still room for improvement. But then overall, I would say compared to some of the past budgets, this budget has taken more steps in terms of, getting taxes from the well-off sectors of the economy compared to some of the other sectors, and that's how it should be. But there's still room for improvement. I think on inflation, inflation is primarily
No,
going to
but
go up.
Nyasab, there is, there was this impression that PMLN, primarily PMLN, is more business driven. They are usually more sympathetic to the business community. For them to come out and impose this tax is clearly a dynamic measure, in the sense that these, like you are saying, these are huge businesses who have not been taxed before, and probably 10% tax is not going to make that huge difference to them anyway. Wouldn't you agree?
No, they have been taxed before, as Mr. Shakil was again pointing out. They contribute 70%, but then they've had super profits over the last 2 years. That is the thing. Now, in terms of PMLN, of course, it's supposed to be a business-friendly party, but then its main support group is the trader group, and that's the complaint that the large-scale industry is having, that you haven't taxed the traders enough, and that's a valid complaint. I would say, I wouldn't say that the super tax should go down, but I think they should also tax the traders, the transporters, real estate much more, because they've been having a free ride for years and years and years, and agriculture, and
Yeah,
that
sir,
money
but for them, let me come back to you. Let me go to Shakil Sab. Shakil Sab, that is of course in terms of the fact that this is piecemeal, and it's come out, and we were earlier also talking about this, that there are likely to be more measures taken pursuant to even after the budget has come out, and we don't know where and what they will be. But isn't that a logical decision, a conscious decision by the government to not dole it out at one time, because of course there is a huge political cost of whatever they are doing to them as a political party, to come out in the forefront in this kind of a economic climate, to take up the reins like this, and then to implement decisions that were probably not even taken by them earlier on, and to come out and then impose those measures. That also one has to take that into account. No,
Look, what I feel, so government is trying to play more gimmicks.
Okay.
For example, if they are serious about having these taxes, I give you 2 or 3 examples. Number one, according to the World Health Organization, we had to increase the tax by 10% on tobacco.
Okay.
But we are not doing. But in there, we're telling that, so we are doing 10% on the tobacco. No. But in the past, we did not. It was an obligation on the state of Pakistan
to do it before, you're saying?
Yes, before. But
So
they were exempted. I give you 2 or 3 examples, then you can analyze.
Okay.
Number 2, look at that. Last year, the state of Pakistan gave 1.7 trillion as an exemption and subsidies to the elite class of this country.
Okay.
1.7. So last year, our total tax collection revenue was 6 trillion, and IMF is asking us to go for 1.4. If the government is serious, they can withdraw these exemptions. So our tax collection would be 7.7 trillion.
You
So
don't think that they will? I mean, maybe they will.
They are not talking about. Nobody is talking about them. Only they are talking about the super tax, and they are. But I feel that's what I'm saying. I'm telling you. I feel like these are the gimmicks. One thing. Second thing. On the super tax, there are 2 types of the taxes. One is the 10% on the production, and other type is on the income. On the production side, is the 10% is super tax that can be transferred to the consumer. But on the income of the big business groups, which is within the range of 1 to 4%, that cannot transfer to the consumer.
Okay.
If it is implemented. But still, I maintain, if the government really want to do something, they have to remove the exemptions which they have given of 1.7 trillion. Maybe this year it will be more.
What are those exemptions? Let's
in the
talk
tax,
about that.
for example, last year they have given the exemptions in the tax duties and the custom duties around about 527 billion to the importers.
Okay.
527 billion. If you look at the 10% of this tax, super tax, I think it will bring about $400 billion, 400 billion rupees. So that's what I'm saying. If they are really,
but Shakil Saab, you are also saying that if you said earlier on also, and Idris Saab can also answer this, that if the government chooses to take all these measures together, then there's also the question of whether people will want to do business in this country at all. So the question of trying to balance that with, you know, removing these rebates in one go.
That's why I always maintain we have to redefine our economic structure. We have to create a balance between the private and the state-owned enterprises. I always advocate in your program, in every program, because the business only thrives on that when you give them concessions. If you don't, I always question, look, business community asks, give us the credit, give us the exemptions, give us the duty free, give us that, the long list. Then why government is not doing, state is not doing its own business? If the government have to give them all the concessions, so why the government will not do their own business? And this is only viable option.
You're saying that you're saying nationalize. What I mean?
Not nationalize. We have the state-owned enterprise like steel mill.
Yes.
For example, now the steel mill demand is on high. Why? Because there's a construction boom. We are going to build the ML1. There we are going to build the special economic zones, industry sector. So that's why the new investment is coming in the steel sector. Then why we are not reorganizing of the steel mill of Pakistan? One thing, second thing, telecom sector. We are talking about the e-commerce. We are talking about digitalization. We are talking about the digital connectivity. Why cannot we work with our telecom sector to bring us money? If the Jazz is going to have the money, Telenor or the Zong and other companies, then why not our state-owned enterprise is not doing the business? So this is a fundamental question. State have to redefine the structure of the economy. Otherwise, not only in Pakistan. Look, if the USA during the
I'm going to
COVID-19,
try and understand this.
That's what I'm telling you. Look at the biggest. USA is the biggest economy of the world. But during the COVID-19, they did not have the money to give the relief package. They had to print the $2 trillion. But on the contrary, if you look at China, they have the 32% of the state-owned enterprises in their GDP. So they had the money to give to your people. They did not have to go to print the money. In the USA case, the businessmen are big, but the state have less money. Why they are enjoying this at this point of the time? Because they have the free lunch in the form of the dollar is a basic money, so basic standard money. That's why they are sustaining. The day, so this dollar is gone from the international currency, so they will be facing the more severe problem than Pakistan and other developing countries. So we have to redefine the structure of economy.
Idris Saab, there are two arguments here. You know, if I and correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not an economic expert at all, so I'll defer to whatever you all say. But as far as this is concerned, I mean, there's one way of either leaving the market in free fall and letting it regulate itself, or the government steps in to regulate it. You know, there are two arguments. There are arguments to both sides, but largely all over the world, isn't there argument that you leave the market completely, you know, and let it adapt to its own, you know, have its own competition, and let people, you know, let it be free rather than any kind of regulation, so to speak, because that doesn't really have long-term advantages in any country.
Yep, actually, government and market are two essential players of the economy, and both have to work jointly. But as far as regulation is concerned, yes, the regulations are too restrictive, too high in Pakistan, and these need to be reduced, because regulations are quite often used by the officials, by the bureaucrats and others for rent-seeking purpose, to granting permission for something. They can make manipulations, there can be some extraction, etc.
But so in any case, licenses, for example, when we talk about telecom, of course the licenses are issued by the government. When we in any area, I mean, when you talk about whether it's the sugar industry or the cement, or you know.
Agreed. But once you have issued the license, then let the market functions.
That's
there
what I'm
could
saying.
be number of reforms. What Ramesa was referring to is that restructuring the economy. So basically what we have to, when we have to play these gimmicks that reduce the tax on this and increase the tax on this, this is because the size of the cake is too small.
Okay.
What we need to do is to increase the size of the cake. We need to enhance growth. And PIDE has worked a lot on this reform agenda, this growth agenda. There could be a lot of reforms, and these could be, some of these would be politically doable right now, some of these would be long term, and some of these would be short term. So let's first focus on the easiest one.
And this is one of the easiest one, you think? I don't think
No, the
so.
tax, no, let's come to another thing. If you just increase internet access for the population, give internet where internet is not available, then the IT sector is already booming and is making contribution to the economy in terms of employment as well as in terms of growth. So if internet is available in far-flung areas, then this can contribute a lot to the economy. Coming to regulations, coming to small things.
But internet is now largely available everywhere.
No, in far-flung areas in FATA it's not available, in Cholistan it may not be available. And you see the potential of e-commerce, and not just e-commerce. For example, telemedicine. The people have to come from rural areas to urban centers for medication, etc. So if the doctors can give at least some preliminary advice to the people sitting in rural areas through telemedicine, so this would enhance growth and this would reduce time and efficiency, etc., increase efficiency. So there is a lot of room for growth by enhancing just internet access. Coming to another small thing, that is, for example, so that's why I'm referring to small things which are easier to do. A lot of things require attestation of CNIC.
Okay.
What purpose this serves? Attestation of NIC. Me and you can easily find a grade 17 person, but it's not possible, easily possible for a person sitting in rural area to find a grade 17 person. He would have to travel something, incur fuel charges, enter cost, etc. If we can remove this requirement, and whatever organization needs certification of the CNIC, they can directly approach NADRA, they can directly be connected to the NADRA database.
So, okay, let me come back to you. Nyasab, these measures that Idris Saab is talking about, these are, again, these are large scale, or in some case, small scale reforms when we talk about them, or we talk about, ease of doing business. Which most governments talk about, but whether they actually translate, we'll have to see. The last government spoke about it, they talked about it, but we haven't really seen. And I think you're probably a better person to tell me how you think they did in terms of ease of business, or in terms of trying to make it easy. When you would talk about one window operation, all of those things. Do they actually ever translate, or are those measures, again, those long-term measures that will need, the kind of sustainability, the kind of, again, the charter that we talk about over time, that those will or should be implemented regardless of whatever government comes in. If we are looking at, even if we are looking at an election 2 years down the road, sooner, later, however, there will be measures taken by this government, which I'm sure most governments can agree, if they choose to leave their politicking aside, will be good for the country. But will they adhere to them? Will they continue them? Those are also important questions, right?
Yeah, I mean, in fact, they are the more important questions, because, we keep getting into this cycle that we have a short growth burst, and then we immediately have a crisis. This is what happened in 2018 when we reached 6%, and now again we reached close to 6%. And again, we had even a bigger crisis. And the reason is that we do not get these growth rates from increases in investments and increases in productivity, but from, increasing our fiscal deficits, our current account deficits, our money supply. And what that then quickly leads is, an economic crisis. So all this that the government is doing right now, the fiscal measures is just inflicting the pain to stabilize and contract the economy. So that is the painful side. But if we have to break the long-term cycle of economic crisis after every economic boom, then we have to do these crucial reforms and get our investment growth rates high. Our investment GDP ratio is about 15%. Even the regional South Asia investment GDP ratio is close to 25 to 30% in our neighboring countries. Forget East Asia and so on. And then our productivity is actually so low, and it's actually going down over the years. So we had started, some of these activities on ease of doing business, both under Mr. Ismail Saab when he was Board of Investment Chief, and then under Mr. Harun Sharif, and we did improve considerably on the World Bank ease of doing business. But those were just starting points, and we have to do a lot of things. We have to. The government has to come up with a growth strategy now. All of these measures that are being taken, interest rates are going up, your exchange rate is, rupee is going down, your fiscal deficit is being cut, your taxes are going up. All of this is going to contract the economy. So where is the government going to find the jobs, create the jobs, and so on? So here there is an opportunity. Domestic demand is going to be low, so the government can try to channel domestic and foreign investment into export sectors that will still create jobs, which will ignite growth, and then it will also help us overcome, the current account deficit that we have, which is quite huge. So that is the challenge for the government. Despite all these painful stabilization measures, still got to, increase investment, and I think Cpec is a great opportunity here. It became slow under PTI. PMLN had started it, and the Chinese have a good rapport with the Prime Minister, so it's crucial that these special economic zones get going and so on. So that is the big challenge before the government.
Right, let me come back to you. Shakil Saab, with regard to Cpec, I think we've been speaking about it for a while. We were speaking about it even during the last government's tenure. Do you think that it will translate now at all in terms of our economic gain?
I will come to the Cpec later on, but I just want to add one thing about the prior discussion. We're talking about the size of the cake. Look, the size for whom? For the individuals, for the state of and people?
For the people.
For the people. If we look at the size of cake of USA, it's the biggest economy of the world. Europe, among the biggest economies of the world. But in the USA, there are 36 million people are below the poverty line. And in Europe, it's 100 million people below the poverty line and social exclusion.
Okay.
And in China, so there is zero poverty. Why? Because they define the structure of economy and who will be taking what part of the cake. It's not for the free for all, and we assuming like that the market will regulate itself.
Okay.
That's why I say that we have to redefine the economy.
You're saying that model is not going to work for us, the US model or the European model?
Capitalism is not working here because the basic principles of the capitalism has been ignored. Right now we are facing the capitalism which is being called as a warlord capitalism. So where the warlords only care for their interest, not about anybody else. So that is the mentality of the capitalism right now. That required another debate on that. But coming back to your question on Cpec. No doubt, this government completed the first phase of Cpec efficiently. Then this contributed, although there were certain areas where we have the differences with them, but PMLN delivered on that. But no, PMLN, what thing is missing? Second phase of Cpec is different from the first phase of Cpec. First phase was all about G2G, government to government, or G2B, government to the business. So there was not much hassle.
Okay.
Second phase is being led by the private sector, industrialization.
We've seen the Prime Minister go to Gwadar even today. There seems to be an active interest.
They have active interest, but the way to how to move it, that is missing the part, because they are trying to build on G2G model.
Okay.
It's not G2G, no. It's a business who will take care. For example, for the B2B business, they have to deal with the 7 registration companies.
Okay.
And the worst part is that they have to register with the FBR at the federal level, and the regional tax offices in their district, they are doing the business. They have to deal with the 35 different types of the tax agencies. So these are, there are a number of other things of ease of doing business. So, these are different from G2G cooperation.
Okay.
So, government have to redefine its strategy of implementation. That is why we suggested, because when this government came into the power, make Cpec authority the most strong body with the decision making and implementation. Last PTI created Cpec authority, but they made it a facilitation agency which did not deliver much. But they have to make it a very strong organization with the decision making and implementation body. And if they don't want to make the Cpec, then make the planning commission, give the planning commission that duty. Otherwise, all the ministries will be playing with each other. Right now what we are observing, there is a tug of war among the ministries. Board of Investment said, it is my job. Planning say, oh well, I will do. Energy say, yes, I will do. The Commerce say, I will lead it on it. Agriculture say, I will lead on that. So, all the ministries are playing tug of war.
So, they should have separate ministry for Cpec?
Not separate ministry, separate body, like that what the China did. Because in special economic zone mean you have to treat them with a special focus and innovative policies. There is a study on the success and the failure of special economic zones, which indicate that those countries which went with the innovative policies, they were successful. There is a comparison with two countries.
Okay.
India started the special economic zone 2 years before China. Look at the size of Indian economy and the Chinese economy. China is the second biggest economy and India is still struggling on the 3 trillion. Reason? India is like us.
Okay.
Lot of confusion, lot of bureaucracy, no central work, nothing like that to make a decision. On the contrary, what China did, even they gave the power to the local government of that district to make a decision on certain areas because they wanted to make it a successful. So that's model we have to adopt. How we can make it more efficient and bring it to the one place.
What about sustainable? We talk about sustainable measures in economy. Let me go to Idris Saab. Idris Saab, as an economist, do you think that there is retention? Because we've seen, there are some programs that this government has said that they will continue. Also, do you think by and large when we have governments change, is there a history of retaining programs that they feel are beneficial generally, or do you think that has not happened consistently over time? It's a trend that can perhaps now pick up because there will definitely be measures that will need long-term sustainability for them to have any kind of success, right?
Policy instability is a critical issue of Pakistan and policy stability has not been there.
Because we haven't had one Prime Minister complete 5 years, regardless, even if the government has, we haven't seen that happen. And there is, unfortunately, because of that, we've also had, that has had its own repercussions.
And this policy instability is basically the thing that discourages investment because one day you negotiate Recodic, another day it is cancelled, one day you negotiate Kake, another day it is cancelled. There have been cases with HAPCO and many others. Back in 90s, we established an industrial zone in Gaduna Mazai. This was poppy growing area and incentives were given to the locals and it was credited at 3%, electricity and gas at 50%, and some industries were established there. And then the government changed and all these incentives were taken back and now Gaduna is deserted. So we were talking about SEZs. When we talk of SEZ, it would be, we have to design the incentive structure very carefully because SEZs means that there would be some beneficial treatment and priority treatment to the industries located there.
But were we not talking about SEZs in the last government also?
No, we were talking. Even in the last government, now we have to design the incentive structure very carefully because let's suppose that the tax rate is 0 in a SAZ and the tax rate outside is 29%, then the industry located outside might be encouraged to relocate. Though we can ban relocation, but people would find ways to relocate. So we have to design the incentives very carefully, and yes, policy stability is very important.
Let me come back to you. Now, sir, political, I'm going to ask you something political. As far as this whole, what do you think are the ramifications if today, just hypothetically speaking, if the PTI decided to agree to a charter of economy, do you think that they will lose their vote bank? Do you think that they will, people who are going to vote for them, their voters will not vote for them? How do you see it affecting them? Do you think it will have political ramifications for them? Is that the reason why they don't come forward? Is that the reason it didn't happen last time? How do you look at it overall?
Well, I think, politics of confrontation is part of PTI's DNA, and it rarely, shows much interest in having, bipartisan or multi-partisan consensus on key critical national issues. But then I also feel that, it has its, areas of confrontation. So, that's focused on corruption and those kind of issues, and, this all this issue about, the so-called US conspiracy. So if, there is some scope for, a charter of economy, and if PTI decides to wisely go forward on that, I don't think it's a technical issue, and I don't think it will, affect its vote bank so much. But then, the critical thing for that is that it would have to come back to the assembly to participate in those kind of deliberations. And right now, it's not showing any, inclination to come back. So I think,
and who is gaining, in your opinion, from that, the fact that they're not coming back in the assemblies?
Well, I don't see, PTI gaining much from it. I think the momentum, the wind has gone out from their sails, for quite a few weeks. They were quite ferocious, and, long march and this and jalsas and dharnas. But all of a sudden, all that has gone in the background, and they are very, very quiet. And I think they are at a bit of a loss. They have a golden opportunity. There's so much inflation, with fuel price increases after 3 rounds of them, and there might be more. But then, they've completely failed to, sort of mobilize people. They had this.
That's what I want to come to. I mean, even in the kind of climate that we are talking about, where we are seeing imposition of tax because the government has to take those measures, they are making those difficult decisions. The PTI is still unable to mobilize its vote bank. In this kind of a scenario, what do you expect in the by-polls?
Well, that is the thing, there is obviously the truth that, PMLN is very strong in Punjab, but then it's taken so many unpopular measures, so people will remember that.
But Niyaz Saab, these are all PTI winners, right? Because these are the dissidents.
I think at least half of them were actually independents who then later on joined PTI. So it wasn't that they won on the PTI vote bank. It was their own vote bank that the majority won. So now let's see what happens. There'll be the addition of the PMLN vote bank. In many of these constituencies, PTI was 3rd or 4th or 5th. So that's something that goes in PMLN's favor. And then the fact that people will still remember what happened in Punjab under Usman Buzdar and all the inflation that they had, and then how PTI has behaved in the Punjab Assembly. So it's going to be, a very interesting dynamic, and it's very difficult to predict. But just going by the fact that they were independents, I would say that, PMLN might have an edge despite all the inflation that it has stoked in recent weeks.
So these electables, so to speak, these were electables that then chose to, independents or electables, or who then chose to be in the PTI, who will now contest on, one assumes the PMLN ticket.
Yes, exactly. And I think the majority, at least 10 of them are like that, and then there might be other ones who were on PTI ticket right from the start, but I think the majority is like that.
But the PTI is choosing to field candidates against them, right?
Yeah, because it has this two-stage policy: boycott National Assembly but stay in the assemblies at the provincial level, both in KP as well as in Punjab. Because their hope is that they only force elections in the National Assembly while having their own provincial governments in Punjab and KP. So that helps them in the national elections. Obviously, it's not going to be easy for them to have that situation with elections just now about a month and a half away. So let's see. I think they'll be close, but I think PMLN will still have an edge.
Let me come back to you. Shakil sir, what do you think is, I mean, we have PPP is primarily, of course now it's part of the PDM, but you know, primarily they've always had Sindh, and you know, Sindh somehow, even with the PTI trying to make inroads into urban Sindh, they haven't been able to do so as far as rural Sindh is concerned. PTI has at this time, of course, KPK. What do you think is behind this adamant refusal to sit in the assembly? You know, let's leave the legitimacy argument aside for 1 second, which keeps coming up as far as the PTI is concerned. We don't believe this government, we don't acknowledge this government, we don't want to acknowledge it, we don't think it's legitimate. The point is, it's there. Who's losing every day?
I think it's only politics and the ego.
Okay.
If they think they cannot sit in the same assembly where the government is, this coalition is sitting, then the Punjab is the same case.
Do you think it's also about the fact that a lot of people have said that Imran Khan Sahab only wants to be there as the Prime Minister?
Everybody in the system who is in the politics, they want to be the Prime Minister. Even
No,
to talk to
of
the
course.
one ticket, Shekhar Shah, he must want to become the Prime Minister.
No, that may be true, but the point is that, you know, we've had Shehbaz Sharif Saab sit there as an opposition leader. We've had, you know, Nawaz Sharif Saab be there in opposition.
Because the PTI believe they were not given the space to play and implement their agenda. They feel, one thing. And second thing, they feel if we come with the 2/3 majority, we can make decisions on the policy.
But are they going to be able to come to in a 2/3 majority by not getting into the assemblies?
They think they are like their slogans, imported government.
They are now choosing to challenge NAB law.
The regime change, everything. So I just tried looking today. The Imran Khan has announced that they will be going for I think on a parade ground for Jalsa in the next week. They are starting again, getting the rhythm. Maybe they will not be able to go for the long march.
But they will continue these jalsas.
Jalsas. And look, either we like it or not, this you can say that inflation has really given impetus to the, you can say, the liking for the PTI.
You think the by-polls will favor them?
Let's see, but I think so. It will favor them because the miseries of the people. It's a because what was the narrative of once Bilawal Bhutto was leading, you can say, rallies from the Sindh to the Islamabad. The slogan was inflation. When the other party,
but did that work for them?
No, yes, the people.
The Mengai marches that happened.
So it worked for them. People started to question the PTI. But when they came to the power, the inflation has been multiplied. So
right, unfortunately.
the Lord, people are asking no.
Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for being with us, Shakil Ramesab, Dr. Idris Khwaja. Thank you for joining us today. Dr. Niaz Murtaza, thank you for being with us. In terms of what's happening as far as the economy is concerned, of course, we have seen the imposition of super tax. We've also had, you know, the finance minister say that there will perhaps be more sections of society, of businesses that they might include in the tax net further. What other measures will follow, we don't know at this time, but of course, in terms of sustainable measures and a charter of economy where long-term measures can be taken, which can then be continued by successive governments, is what needs to be worked on. Whether that kind of working relationship can happen or not, again, seems far away at present. Of course, the by-polls will also indicate whose popularity is where, as far as the parties are concerned, as far as the opposition of PTI is concerned, their whole narrative is concerned. How much of that is actually gaining ground will be clearer by the by-polls and the results that follow. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.